Welcome to Live Life Well with me, Nikki. I'm super excited to be relaunching my podcast and the range of guests that I have got lined up to be explaining how they're doing things differently in this world that we live in right now, not being dictated to by the norms and standards of everyone else around them, but really invested in opening your mind and allowing you to see things differently and to really empower yourself with this information. Today, I have got an amazing guest, Dr. Nai'm Moola, who I'm super excited to have on my show today. And the reason I'm super excited is because he is breaking the mold of how you expect a psychiatrist to be operating. He's an integrative psychiatrist, and he's going to explain to us what that means and how he's helping the world see psychiatry differently. Welcome.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Can you tell us more, first of all, what is an integrative psychiatrist?
An integrative psychiatrist is an individual who takes the whole patient into account, not just a diagnostic entity as an outlook, looking at the symptoms of a person and then prescribing medication after you've made a DSM diagnosis. Rather, you look at the holistic health of a person, their social environment, their habits, their eating patterns, their recreational time and how is that consumed, their respect towards their work-life balance. And with that, you make holistic adjustments as well as use psychotropic medication and do some forms of therapy as well in a combination to give the best outcome for a patient ultimately.
That's super unusual for a psychiatrist because a psychiatrist, when you go there, you say, this is my problem I'm struggling with. They give you the diagnosis, they give you some meds to try and send you home, and then see whether that's actually going to work for you or not.
That's true. That's exactly how I was trained. I mean, I'm in psychiatry now about 15 plus years. And you're right. When you go to specialty training, it's all about understanding the DSM, understanding diagnostic entities, how to look for symptoms and tease out symptoms in an interview with a patient, and then very formulary-based approach with medication and very prescriptive type of therapeutic modalities that we tend to use. That unfortunately didn't fulfill many outcomes of positive changes in patients. I was stuck with what we were introduced to in psychiatry registrar time, the revolving door phenomena. In mainstream private practice, I found that that was the case. In once or twice a year or yearly, I'd get the same individual coming in front of me. Yeah, we try the latest of the medication choices out there. I'd refer to some of the best psychologists in their field, and I would not get much of a change in their outcomes, unfortunately.
I so relate to that because I often describe the rehab industry as like the washing machine. Once you're in that cycle, you just keep going and you just keep going. You don't ever seem to kind of step out of it. And I mean, I've worked with many psychiatrists over the years, and I can't be upset with anything that I've seen simply because a psychiatrist does what they're trained to do. Like you said, they diagnose a patient and they medicate accordingly. At no point is there really any question about, why are you feeling this way? What's actually going on? Are there any other areas of your life that maybe need adjustment besides just giving you medication to take the edge off or to medicate this particular symptom that we're dealing with?
True, true. That's just true to what I have experienced as well. Logically, yes, we can't blame the psychiatrists. I'm not here to point fingers at my colleagues. It's just how we train and we're restricted by time and restricted by outlooks. There was a time that therapy was part of the psychiatrist training, very core part of training. We had to undergo our own process work before we actually treated individuals. And somehow in the time that I became a psychiatrist, that had fallen away. And so, yes, we are trained in therapy, more psychodynamic or cognitive behavior approaches, but not really making sense of ourselves. So, how can you be a healer if you haven't healed yourself? And a lot of us carry our own baggage, whether it's big traumas or small traumas. There's a psychiatrist out in Canada, a physician, Gabo Mate, who talks about the small T and the big T. And the big T traumas are, of course, things of abuse and molestation and such like that. But the small T traumas are subtle things that change through nurturing environments. We may talk about having a happy, nurturing environment, but somehow some of our parental models fall short of the ideal model, or there may be models of talk that are quite challenging and leave you feeling judged as you come through, yet they didn't mean to hurt you. They tried to grow you in a sensible way they thought was right. I tracked this back, and I've been looking at my own life story in the way I come to approaching psychiatry in an integrated way. I carried my own small T traumas from my childhood. I had my own daddy issues, so to speak. And I had to make sense of this. And I only made sense of this after the man passed away in 2017. And that's when my real journey into this integrative part fell into place. First, making sense of what I had just lost my dad. But first, I went into a very locked off space. I suppressed the emotion. I threw myself at my work, and unfortunately complicated my own functionality as I did such behaviors. Though, as I did this, I was doing a lot of legwork to try and make sense of what was wrong here, and I started researching my past, researching my family, my dad. I didn't really know my dad; I knew him as my dad, and so I started understanding where he came from, who was his parents, what was the dynamic of his father to him, and the whole modeling. And I realized that he just mimicked his father, and he had a lot of shortcomings in that way because his dad didn't have the proper model of parenting. Then I looked at that in a bigger picture. I looked at environmental factors, I looked at community factors, religious modeling, extended family values, and society in general. And yeah, we came from a time of very intimidatory models of respect: spare the rod, spoil the child, children seen, not heard. All of that such corporal punishment was, I mean, I was in the black book quite a few times at school. Let's not go there now. But yeah, so that's where I started making sense of this generational impact on life, and no one really meaning bad, because every generation did their best for the generation that they put in front of them, with opportunity, with materialistic options and educational opportunities. So they didn't go out of the way to break us in the provisional love models. They fed us, they clothed us, they educated us, they sheltered us. Their emotional love models fell short. A lot of this was dictated by religious prescripts, by society prescripts, by extended values of families and the community that one lived in, complicating, of course, the upbringing models. And then at the same time, we have this distortion of society that pulls both parents away from a child very early in life, because it's quite costly to live in modern society. With the nurturing model has really fallen short. I mean, mums have what, 3, 4 months before they have to go back to work. And if you look at our closest primate, they nurture up to 9 years old. The young stay with the mum, and nothing the young does is taken with reprimand. They actually protect the young from the rest of the troop, and nurture it all the way through till it's a young adult, and then more structure is given to it. We started intimidating our child and reprimanding our child for dropping, breaking, messing at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. We take them to school, they're getting reprimanded for not saying language properly, not writing properly. They already feel failures before they even left the nurturing environment or the early formative educational environments. This is where I started looking deeper and deeper into what could be done differently. Of course, I took that into a generational story. With every patient, I do depth psychology. I make sure I send them off to do a research on their family and not from their mind. They had to go and interview as many people as they could to come back with an overlapping story, so we can show a bigger picture of truly what was going on back there. Often they come back with like, oh my God, now I see it. Where before it was, I had a beautiful childhood. No, there's nothing wrong there. And so they realized that nothing was done deliberately, but there were definitely shortcomings that played out. Then we looked into the behaviors of their parents as to how they spent their recreational time, or if they did have recreational time, what were their boundaries with their work, how did they talk to each other in the home, what was the dynamic of mom and dad, to see what a woman and a man relationship would be formulated for that child. We looked at eating habits. And we looked at early onsets of illnesses or any illnesses, habits in general of smoking, alcohol consumption, and then we tracked that into their life, and we saw commonalities in how they fall into the crutches of coping, dysfunctional coping, or even if suicide played an option in early in one of their nurturers' life, how suicide became an option in their life, or if their nurturers had very extremes of emotions, so they go 0 to 100 in seconds, and you're having almost like a bipolar or emotionally dysregulated behavior, and you see that the individual mimic that as their own coping. So a lot of what we call genetic, we're really possibly epigenetic and more nurture related molding than anything else.
And isn't it interesting that the patient then still carries so much shame for their behavior when it's this unconscious programming that they think is their fault or their responsibility? I mean, sounds like generational been building up to that point.
Of course. So of course, that takes us to the next model of forgiveness, the unconditional love and acceptance of all role players of their past, and of themselves, because if they don't forgive themselves, because they get entangled in self-judgment. Let's be fair, a child has a very black and white thinking process. And when they're sitting in front of their parent and getting reprimanded, they don't say the parent is wrong, they believe they're wrong. And then they always start self-judging. Well, generally start self-judging, I would say always. And then that just then snowballs in layers of self-judgment. And if they get bullied or they get picked on by a teacher, that's get added to the self-judgments. And eventually come young adolescents, early adolescents, 13, 14 years old. In the old days, we had a significant amount of rebellious behavior coming through in the young men, and often emotional distortions in the young women as their menstruation sets in. They get more deeper in emotional regulation, dysregulation, and that's when the self-harm behaviors or the substance-related behaviors, or throwing themselves into gangs or odd bunches just so they could find belonging, because a lot of them leave home not believing they belonged in their home for the way they're treated in their home. Some people threw themselves at religion, others threw themselves at substance, others threw themselves into isolation and then gaming and all these distorted behaviors. Others felt inadequate and threw themselves into hours of gymming in a day. All of these are not healthy behaviors. If you look at them from the outside, you think, oh, wow. But truly, you're trying to compensate for things that didn't play out adequately in childhood, in youth.
So, I mean, this is the basis of the work that I do in self-esteem development. It's about challenging the old belief systems and the programming that we were given, and like through repetitive behavior and like consistent like use of the same type of thinking, it becomes, you know, the person's reality. And only through challenging that unconscious belief system are you able to then start putting something different into this computer, I suppose. What I'm curious to know about is that often people want to medicate how they're feeling about it, whether it's the shame or, you know, people talk about anxiety. I almost think it's like this blanket term that people use to be able to describe whatever discomfort they're feeling internally. And talk therapy, I found, has been helpful to a point, but that's when medication has always played a role, where it's like that extra support platform. But like there's new ways that people are dealing with this kind of stuff, and you know, I can see that you are open to learning more about that, just like I am, and I'd love to know what research you have like encountered, and you know, how you think things are maybe potentially moving in the world at the moment.
Of course, before we jump there, I would like to just look at the diagnostic entities. Of course, you talk to the word anxiety and anxiety disorders. If we look at physiology, let's just step back from psychiatric diagnosis, because that's where it gets confusing. There's almost 365 different psychiatric diagnoses out there at the moment, and they're largely an overlap of each other if you step back and look at the symptom. So what are we dealing with? We're dealing with a physiological entity, a body. And in this physiology, there's only two blueprints. One is rest and growth, and one is fight and flight. We are dealing with people who are distortedly activated in fight or flight physiology. That's what we're dealing with. And of course, that can present as anxiety, as irritability, as rumination, as paranoia, and then complicate with whatever else they're doing in habits and thereafter to more complex psychopathology. And that's where the DSM comes into very clear descriptors of symptoms that give you a descriptor of a presentation, but not necessarily talking to the physiology that's entrapped. So we're talking to locked-in syndromes is basically what we are. We're locked into a physiology of the adrenal gland, to the amygdala, which is in the deep temporal lobe, to thinking process, and back to the adrenal, and back to the amygdala, and back to thinking, and that drives this whole physiological process. And the adrenal, through its various parts and in its impact on dopamine release, gives us a lot of the symptoms that we come to talk about anxiety, the palpitations, the tight chest, the muscle spasms, the restlessness, the fidgetiness, the rumination, the distractibility, all the cognitive impacts. So we are dealing with an individual that has an ego that has been formulated between birth and somewhere 12, 13 years old, but locked into a distorted form of the ego because of inadequacies, perceived inadequacies taken in from the way the nurturing environment has treated them, and then creating dysfunctional defense mechanisms that then are projected into their behavior or requiring coping of substance or ultimately medication.
I mean, for me, in a layman's kind of understanding from my side, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I understand it like in the old days, I was waiting for a lion to come and eat me, you know,
Yes.
and so I was in that like heightened state, and I kind of lived my life like that. I'm constantly waiting for that lion to come out and get me, and I never get to actually calm down to that space again where I'm like not waiting for something to jump out of the bush. And I'm always going, between social media and family and whatever. I never get my system to actually calm down. So I'm constantly in that state. And then instead of dealing with that problem, I want to medicate it away. Am I understanding it correctly?
That is correct. So you locked into that physiological trap. And unfortunately, you locked in usually from intrauterine time. And this is where research has shown that the stress hormone of a mom is transferred through the placenta and umbilical cord to the developing fetus and wires their brain to be into survival state. A baby born with colicky or ENT problems and restlessness and needs to be carried all the time, already showing signs of activated stress response. That's how early this is online. And you're right. What did mainstream psychiatry have to do with this process? Well, we couldn't talk it out of a person, so we numbed it in a person. You use antidepressants, your serotonin-based molecules are very adequate numbing agents. Then we have slowing agents, which are considered antipsychotics and anticonvulsants. Antipsychotics block dopamine in the limbic system primarily, where rumination is playing in the subconscious part of your mind. And the anticonvulsants are slowing down all nervous conduction throughout the body and, of course, in the CNS, globally, though, not selectively. So you have a very fuzzy cognition and a whole lot of knock-on side effects from these processes, but you're not truly addressing the core problem. You're right. So you're locked in with the symptoms just muted in your body, and you must get on with life in that state.
What's the link between that and burnout?
Oh, burnout is when you've got all this activated state going on, but you are now more complicated by the variables of more responsibility and stresses of life. That this your plate is always already full, and now you're adding more to it. And eventually, physiology and the way you're managing yourself through that time, and lack of sleep and poor self-care and nutritional management, your physiology comes to a point where it can't go any further. That's the point of burnout.
So even if you're medicated, you can still be heading towards burnout.
Of course, I've had individuals in the past on combinations of medication burn out twice in a year. But because of not changing behavioral patterns on top of taking medication, people think, take my meds, I'm going to be fine. And no, it doesn't work that way. That's why when you go back to your psychiatrist, they're either upping your dose, and let's try this one, let's try that combination. And there's chopping and changing of medication that goes on, because invariably the force of energy that's created by emotional distortions breaks through any medication hold on it. And you can have individuals on 4 or 5 antipsychotics and still have breaking through symptoms, or antidepressants 2 to 3 at a time, which is irrational pharmacology, of course. But that's what goes on out there, because ultimately we're not trying to adjust the low like other variables, or the individual's life are so complex they can't afford to take time out or adjust variables and just want a patchwork to get on. So modern society just wants us to put our people back out in society as quickly as possible. I mean, consider that medical aids only give you 3 years for admission in psychiatry. You can have unlimited time in the medical admission, but 3 weeks in psychiatry.
Crazy.
It is crazy. And we are meant to patch a person up and get them going. Often we don't want to utilize all their benefits in an admission, so you keep them there for 2 weeks and maybe give them a week off post-discharge. But in reality, that's inadequate time. In other countries, you get up to 3 months off in a mental health recovery phase. We don't have that grace in this country, unfortunately. So where does this leave us? I mean, there's the question you propped earlier, and my since 2016, 2017, I stumbled upon what was going on in the so-called renaissance of psychedelics. And this had been going on since about 1999. I mean, psychedelics went into a lull for almost 3 decades, since 1969, 1970, when all the hoo-ha after the hippie generation and the American government and the World Health Organization classes drugs with all illicit substances and as problematic products and banned them from usage. Yet prior to that time, between about 1935 and 1969, there were almost 40,000 patients treated by psychedelics and with psychedelics, sorry, and over 1,000 clinical articles written about the success in these models. I mean, the founder of Alcoholics
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, so was treated with LSD, and he said that had a profound impact to him getting his sobriety.
Crazy how they ignore that part.
Of course. And the fact that these substances, and these include psilocybin, ayahuasca, iboga, San Pedro, had been and peyote had been used over millennia by different cultures for what they considered body, mind, and soul healing, spiritual healing. And this had played a role and kept them in bliss, so to speak, over millennia. And along the way came our allopathic outlooks and the banning of such products. So anyway, this renaissance had taken off, and I think one of the initial studies was for terminally ill cancer patients. and they're free of mortality, the facing of mortality, and a small group of them had been prescribed a large dose, and they talk hero doses of psilocybin, the magic mushroom, and they had the most profound mystical and spiritual experiences, and their fear of mortality had been extinguished, and the benefits of some of these went on for over a year when they followed up on these patients, for those that survived beyond that point. That led to further granting of research licenses and ethics approval of in different parts of the world. I mean, we have work going on in Imperial College of Medicine, Johns Hopkins in the US, an organization called MAPS, a multidisciplinary approach to psychedelic studies. And since then, there's been a flurry of studies coming through. I think we're sitting with over 2,500 papers in the last 20 years almost now that show unanimously that we're dealing with something profoundly powerful in psychiatry. And not powerful in the way that you're going to take medication and replace the medication with these products. No, these products have been used maybe 2 or 3 times in deep controlled settings, experiences where psychotherapy is used to prepare the patient in advance of their experience, and then there's integrative work done post, and then they reestablish a baseline and go back in. And they've had profound outcomes with conditions like PTSD, anorexia, quite inherently resistant conditions, which is changing, rapidly changing. And with that, there's been studies now going on in almost every condition out there, in further eating disorders, in tic disorders, in ADHD, in inflammatory conditions, in addictive disorders, mood and anxiety disorders, and to an extent, some in psychotic disorders in very controlled environments as well. So what's going on with this product is what everyone wants to know. Well, fascinatingly, under the influence of these products, we have a neuroplastic hotspot that's created in the brain. In other words, the brain is put into a zone of ability to grow real time, where neurons can grow to connect to other neurons or grow longer to reach to areas different in the brain. So you are actually, in layman's terms, rewiring your brain acutely in 4 to 6 hours, depending on the product, some go on longer, and then residually going on for up to 3 weeks to 4 weeks after the use of the acute use of this product. That's why the ongoing integration that goes on.
So, just following on what you were saying now, I'd love to know, the follow on from your story of, going on your own experience, your own journey of being stuck in that place of, I suppose, lostness,
Yes.
and how you came to that point of being interested in the psychedelics, and the role that they could potentially play for you, and maybe did potentially play for you. And I'd love to know more about that, because it's certainly something that I haven't done and I'm very curious about. And I really like, for me, it's on the cards, but I like to be educated. And certainly education around personal perspective, and experience is like what's going to encourage me to take action.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, in 2017, I lost my dad, and I rather than deal with it, I bottled up the emotion, and that unfortunately buried myself in work and long hours. He was a man that could work 12-hour days. I was working 12 to 14-hour days, almost 7 days a week. I was also doing calls, and 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 unfortunately, through that time, a lot of anger started coming out of me, a lot of agitation, a lot of anxiety at the same time. So I was a bit of a problem to my wife. She'd attest to that it was difficult to live alongside me, and with my readings and realizing I needed to do something about it, I explored going for my own experience, and I underwent a shamanic guided experience of the use of psilocybin. I must say it was the most profound experience of my life. But prior to that time, I had also lost my religion over the years of being a psychiatrist. I was very scientific based, very detached from anything spiritual or anything otherwise. Through this experience, I so profound that if I can put it this way, my life was explained to me. Everything that I went through from as young as I could remember to every incident that was awkward or challenging or didn't make any sense was explained in a way of what it was for me as a growth model and what I had to do to incorporate it into my life to go forward. So the distortions of my dad made more sense, realizing his love came in the way, but he was also trapped in his own mind for what fell short behind him, and he was still dealing with his own daddy issues. That's why he fell short of being the father I needed him to be for me. And that all came to light through this experience in the most liberating way, that I can only say I had contact with experience of emotion again. I had that locked off heart of mine, felt again. I could feel love, unconditional love and acceptance. and belonging in a way that, yo, that's all I can say, yo. It's hard to put words to it. It left me in a peaceful space in my mind, a quietened space in my mind. There used to be noise that made me battle to go to sleep at night, distracted me from the work I did in the day, that I'd have to ask a question again because I'd be zoning out into my own process work while trying to talk about the person's life in front of me. And all of this just locked into place. And a lot of also what I had gone through with the years of sitting in front of patients, all their words and what I'd reflected on in their life, it's mirrored into my life and made so much sense to versions of what I was going through as through what they were going through. So it was not purely my own personal life that reflected in that journey, but nearly everyone that had worked with in front of me. And they all played a role to heal me in a way that I can't explain any differently. So yeah, it wasn't one. I did go back 2 to 3 times to get deeper experience.
Why do you have to do it more than once?
The layers of experience it's impossible to unpack your whole life within one journey. I mean, a journey is limited by 4 to 6 hours, and there's only so much that you would work through. And I mean, I've been in my body for 48 years at that time, so there's a backlog of a lot of emotional information, and a lot of things I thought I had dealt with really just came flying back into my face. I just suppressed them or kind of dealt with them in the way I thought I'd know deal with best. So it was to go in deeper and deeper each time. But with each journey, there wasn't a repetition of what I'd gone in before. It was almost a continuation of part two, part three, and profoundly more liberating each time. If I had to tell you, prior to journeying, I was a very unhealthy model of a person. At my worst, I sat at 108 kgs, sitting at 38 waist, smoking 20 cigarettes a day, and really didn't care about how I looked. I had less hair than I do have right now. Through these journeys, my self-respect came back. The want to take back ownership of my body and my life and my relationship with my own children, because those were just a bit distorted as well. Because I was the same short father without looking in the mirror. I was looking backwards and still dealing with my daddy issues. I was creating my own daddy issues for my children up front. So all of this started just falling into place, and with that, uh, to where I am right now, I must be thankful. My life is that much more stable, enhanced. I'm not saying perfect. I mean, the so-called journey experience now, I realize it's a constant model of self-improvement. As I help individuals in front of me, I'm in my own journey at the same time, always reflecting on their paths to see if that's still in me, it needs adjusting as well. So they become my mirror as much as I do mirror work of my own, so to speak. And that's how I've come to where I am right now in the outlook of working with psychedelic assisted psychotherapies. Yes.
I mean, when I hear you speak, for me, it gives so much hope for me in how we're actually going to be able to help clients in the future going forward, because we need to be living in our conscious mind. And we can't do that unless we unlock that unconscious like programming. And by what I'm hearing from you and my own research is that's what the psychedelics are doing for us. And like what an opportunity to almost like fast track the healing process that probably otherwise wouldn't be able to happen. And like I try and understand what's holding us back. Why are we being held back from kind of progressing here? Why is it okay to put other drugs into our system legally, but not this? Like, where's the discrepancy? What's the issue?
Well, maybe this sits on a conspiracy level, and that's the best I can speak from. I mean, I do believe it's twofold. Let's be fair to what played out between 1960, well, 60s to 70 with the hippie generation in the US, and make love and peace, not war, with what was going on in the Vietnam War at that time, and their riots against their own government because they broke through the propaganda thinking that was programmed into their mind. And that's one of the biggest drawbacks, I think, for what they fear with these products, is a lot of what we are fed by our own governments are going to be seen through, and that's the first fallback.
And our risk now is that they're going to say that we the quacks, right?
Yes.
We the all of these conspiracy theories, and we're being held back, which is just another block for us to be able to move forward, right?
Of course. And then, of course, the bigger role player is the pharmaceutical industry. And I mean, I did work for the pharmaceutical a drug company for almost 2 years. And I got to see the back offices of how they work with information pertaining to these products, and how they so-called data mine and manipulate how they present this information, that truly they do benefit, but they do so much more harm and they don't talk to that harm in fullest. And you're right, we are numbing our subconscious mind. That's what antidepressants and meds are. Limbic pathways is deep temporal lobes. Deep temporal lobes is where subconscious thinking is seated. And if you're numbing that intuitive part of your mind, you lose a whole component of your body. That subconscious talks through your body talk, which is what moods and anxieties are about. It's a body talk, like a gut feel, a yawn, a backache, or things like that. If you're numbing this, how do you have a full experience of yourself? You have a very limited experience of life, and you almost exist without living, and it's more robotic. So yeah, we are blending off our whole existence, and you're right. This is something that you can't explain rationally. Why can't we use a plant, yet we're using medication that are synthetic, which cause so much more destructive body process? I've seen individuals gain weight, become diabetic, lose their hair, break out in piercing, have no libido, and we say we're giving them quality of life, really.
And we'll up this and lower that and add this and change that. So if a client comes to see you, and I think I've referred a few clients to you myself, just, this looking for a solution in medication, as we've discussed, it's not always there. Sometimes it's necessary as a support, but I'd love to know kind of what's the process. How do you figure out what you want to recommend to a client, or to a patient? I call them clients, you call them patients. And like, what does that look like?
I must say it's almost a standard approach because everyone is locked into the survival physiology. So my starting point is to readjust how they eat, how they sleep, exercising, uh, grounding themselves in mindfulness processes to learn how to still their mind and train their mind. Of course, not perfectly with this. At the same time, I'd introduce some psychopharmacology and primarily tracking the dopamine imbalance. So the dopamine physiology is where the primary imbalance is. Occasionally, I may use a serotonin-based agent to lift the mood, but primarily a dopamine antagonistic approach.
Short term.
Short term, yes. And usually within 3 months, I can actively try and get them off the meds by referring them to our legal psychedelic process in this country called ketamine infusions, that at the moment is approved. And ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic agent. It came out in 1960, used to put people to sleep while they did procedures on them, and got redirected to the veterinary science world, called a horse tranquilizer now, more so because of that dissociative experience. So now we have cleaner agents that just switch off the light, like propofol and things like that. But around 15 years ago in psychiatry abroad, and about 5 years now going in South Africa, it's got repositioned in psychiatry. And no, we don't put people to sleep. We put them into this forced dissociative experience for about 40 to 60 minutes. In this experience, you have frontal lobe that is pulled offline, where a lot of ego defense mechanisms sit. The individual floats into a dissociative experience in the limbic cortices, and where they are, like your dream world is based there. And under the influence of this, you have this release of a chemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, some serotonin. And these create a hotspot of neuroplasticity, primarily in the limbic pathway, unlike mainstream psychedelics that have whole brain change. And with this, you're rewiring the fear response centers, which is where the amygdala sits in the deep temporal lobes. So this is used as an outpatient treatment with a course of 3 to 6, and sometimes with maintenance and otherwise. If used appropriately as a proper psychedelic assisted therapy where intentions are set, physiology is detox, patients are committed to reflective outlooks on their intentions prior to getting to the infusion.
I like that part because a lot of doctors, psychiatrists are just like, take a medication, off you go. But you have to be in some type of like spiritual or therapeutic process simultaneously in order to get like the ideal results that we're after, right?
Of course, of course. You have to put active effort for yourself. If you're looking for a silver bullet to any of these pathways, you will get some benefit, but you usually lose that benefit within 3 to 6 weeks. There are individuals abroad that have been treated with psychedelics, and within 3 to 6 weeks, they're back to their old behaviors or old pathology and reactions. And even with ketamine, there are people who've gone to ketamine infusion and they open-endedly go for it, but they don't seem to get the benefit because their mindset of approach is all wrong. It is going to fix me. No, no. You already have to put effort for yourself, and it would benefit you to catalyze that effort. And that's how we work with this. And of course, you need to integrate each experience after the experience. Within a day or two, they should talk to their treating psychiatrist or psychologist to understand what to look for the benefit and how to build to the next benefit, how to adjust their intentions so things are not gone accordingly. And then you have the best outcomes from this. So I take individuals to psychopharmacology, and within 3 to 6 months, I take them off psychopharmacology using ketamine infusions. That is our mainstream psychedelic at the moment. And at the moment, nearly every patient that comes to me ends up on this pathway because I give them a timeline of about 6 months, depending on if they're coming medication naive, 6 months is more the timeline. If they're coming complicated with medication, then of course we have to stretch the timeline because they've got to rationalize meds and things. But usually this works. And I create a new narrative. I don't say it's an open-ended path with medication. I say, no, it can be cured. And this is what we're going to do to cure it. And of course, I have power over them because they believe my words. And suddenly they're listening to a new wording and they're walking a new narrative of health, different to this is the revolving door, you have to be on your meds. And if you come off it, you're going to relapse. And people leave their meds, relapse, and get severe depression and things. That's the old narrative that we were fed leaving med school. It's a narrative I spewed out to my patients many a time. But then I realized that why did this have to be true? I mean, so far nothing else they told us seemed to be true. Why did I have to listen to the narrative as well? And so I readjusted the narrative. And the truth to that, people have fallen into the new pattern. I've had many success stories of individuals even coming off complex combinations of medications, walking away from me and having more of a social interaction communication with me rather than needing to sit in front of me. But of course, taking a lot of self-responsibility, ownership of their process. If you don't own your process, you're not going to go anywhere. And holding routine, holding self-care, holding boundaries and balances in their life, that's the formula for success, of course.
And I suppose that that's kind of also the space that I find myself in, because it's great to be able to tell the patient you should meditate and you should, be in a space of mindfulness and be present. But for someone that's such a foreign concept, they've never lived, they don't even know what that looks like or what it feels like. And the ability to self-motivate into that space is almost like non-existent. So, I mean, I think that you and I could probably speak for hours, and I can see all the different directions that this can go in. And I think that more is going to be revealed. And I'd love to kind of, as things are unpacking along the way, to be able to, for you and I to meet again and to do this, to educate further, with the new developments and to give greater insight and information to the people who follow us, who listen to us, instead of just being so close-minded and stuck in that washing machine or that revolving door of going nowhere slowly, and hoping that someone is going to fix me and I don't have to actually play any sort of active role in that. When in actual fact, this is my life, and if I don't play an active role in it, like no one else is going to. And the buck stops with us. So I'm super grateful that you made this time. And I'm so grateful that I found you. By the way, I love your social media posts. I love everything. It resonates completely. And I feel very privileged that my eyes have been opened, even though I haven't had the privilege yet of doing a journey. And I look forward to that time when I do. And, it's kind of coming to me in different ways all the time. And like, I look forward to what people like you and I can help our clients and our patients actually achieve in their lives if they're not just kind of stuck on that same treadmill all the time.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you for having me, and definitely we'll take this conversation further.
Awesome.